Það er 50 júlí, Hrafnaþing. Fattaði leið og ég sá dagsetninguna, ég skulda sendiherra Bandaríkjanna hinum ágæta His Excellency Louis Arriaga afsökunarbeiðni. Ég var búin að þiggja boðið 4. júlí boðið í sendiráðinu í gær og í önnum dagsins þá gleymdi ég því, enda verða 70 eftir 22 daga. Svolítið sérstakur þáttur hjá mér í dag. Gestir mínir eru kaþólskur prestur og nunna, Tony Burns og Kathleen McGuire. Þau voru hér á landi ekki alls fyrir löngu, hafa komið hér tvívegis til að halda fyrirlestur einelti, þunglindi og sjálfsvíg, ekki sérlega uppörvandi umræðu efni, en þau eru heimsþekktir sérfræðingar á sviði þeirra hörmungar sem að slíku fylgja. En faðir Tony Burns, hann á líka sérstakt erindi hér til Íslands og er búin að koma hérna held ég 4 sinnum, oft í boði Arngríms Jóhannssonar, vina míns flugstjóra og fyrrum Atlanta forstjóra. Addu flaug nefnilega fyrir hjálparstarf kirkjunnar, eins og þið sáu hér í innganginum, hjálparstarf kirkjunnar þegar Biafra stríðið geisaði hér fyrir einhverjum 40 árum. Og faðir Tony, þessi elskulegi og hóværi kaþólski prestur, það talið að hann, eða fyrir hans tilstilli, hans gjörða, hans þrjósku og hans baráttu að 1 milljón börn í Biafra hafi bjargast. Hann hafi bjargað lífi 1 milljón barna í Biafra. Biafra stríði var í raun og veru fyrsta sjónvarpsstríði þar sem að myndir af deyjandi börnum með uppþefta magan eins og þið sjáu vegna þess að ég ákvað það hér á eftir að taka af dagskrá þáttinn hans Einars Kristins, vinnar okkar sjávarútvegsmál, og sýna myndina sem hann Jón Kristinn Snæholm gerði og hefur nú verið sýnd tvívegis á RÚV, rétt hálftíma mynd, skelfileg mynd og er ekki fyrir viðkvæma. Ég vil bara segja ykkur það strax Biafra stríði, þetta er hálftíma mynd. Faðir Tony, séra Tony eða séra Burns, hvað sem henni vilja kalla það, hann ég veit ekki eiginlega hvernig hann gerði þetta. Vatíkanið spilaði inn í alls konar spilling og ég veit ekki hvað. En hann var potturinn og pannan og þarna voru Þorsteinn Jónsson, flugstjóri, Steini Pælót, Addu, Lolli Runólfur og fleiri, ég veit ekki hvað á að kalla þetta voru glæfra drengir og flugu þarna, sjálfsagt höfðu þeir heilmikið laun fyrir, þeir flugu inn í dauðan í myrkri og lentu í myrkri einhvers staðar í miðjum frumskógi á þjóðvegi sem er svona álíka breiður og þjóðvegur 1 á Íslandi. Það var kveikt svona rétt áður að hjónin skullu niður á full hlöðnum vélum af skreið og lýsi og öðru slíku. Þá var kveikt eitt andartak vegna þess að yfir vellinum sveimaði sprengjuvél frá Nígeríustjórn sem að hlaðin sprengjum, og ef að sást minnsta ljós að þá voru sprengjurnar látnar falla. Faðir Tony hér strax á eftir og svo í seinni hluta þáttarins þá kemur systir Kathleen McGuire og situr með okkur og þá breytist umræðuefnið svolítið. Farið ekki langt. Á meðan við gerum við bílinn með nýjustu tækjum, tækni og vönduðum vinnubrögðum ekkur þú á Avís bílaleigubíl sem þú færð á staðnum. Bílar og tjón Skemmuvegi 44, bílarogtjón.is.
Þú þarft ekki að skóla allan daginn til að viðhalda frískum andadrætti og verja tennurnar. Colgate munnskor, 12 tíma vörn gegn bakteríum og frískur andadráttur.
Humarinn kominn, árgerð 2012. Stór, smár og safaríkur. Tilvalinn á grillið, pönnuna eða fyrir elskuna þína. Fiskikóngurinn, Sogavegi 3.
Í Brynju Laugavegi 29 fæst úrval af járnvöru, handverkfærum, trésmíðavélum, málningavörum, baðherbergisvörum og norsku smíðajárni. Brynja lykilverslunum í Laugaveg í 93 ár.
Slæður, skart, mikið úrval af sumarslæðum, skarti og töskum. Skoðið úrvalið, Skarthúsið, Laugavegi 44.
Ásgeir þolir ekki að bíða. Hann bara á undan. En í flugi getur ekki verið á undan. Þú verður bara að bíða. Eða fljúga með Icelandair, sem eitt stundvísasta flugfélag í Evrópu. Njóttu þess. Icelandair.
Áttu von á gestum. Vandaðir svefnsófar með heilsu þínu. Betra bak.
Hvítibærinn og golfklúbbur Borgarnes, frábær 18 hólu völlur, gisting og veitingar í Hvítabænum. Það bara bæjarleið í Borgarnes, Hvítibærinn og GB.
Allt á mótorhjólamanninn og hjólið. Besta verðið. Icebike mótorhjólaverslun, Iðavöllum 10, Keflavík.
Hágæðaviðarvörn fyrir allar aðstæður. Flugger, fagleg þjónusta.
Saga próf fyrir konur og karla, virkni staðfest í vísindaransókn. Saga próf náttúruvara úr íslenskri hvönn fyrir konur og karla sem hafa ama af tíðum þvaglátum. Fæst í apótekum, heilsubúðum, stórmarkuðum og á netinu. Saga Medica.
Höfum í 20 ár stundað viðskipti með allar tegundir sjávarfangs til hagsbóta fyrir land og þjóð. Stöndum vörðum frjálsviðskipti með fisk. Eflum íslenskan fiskmarkað. Fiskmarkaður Íslands HF. Eru með alla almenna þjónustu fiskmarkaða, fiskmarkaður Bolungarvíkur og Suðureyrar.
Hvert langar þig að fara? Iceland Express flýgur til 16 áfangastaða í sumar. Kynntu þér málið á icelandexpress.is. Iceland Express lækkar verð.
Livestream Greens til að fá heilsuna og orkuna upp. Jafnvel kraftmesta ofurfæði jarðar. Livestream. Glæsileg LG sjónvörp í hátækni. Við aðstoðum við rétta valið. Hátækni Ármúla 26.
Allians tryggir þína framtíð.
Svo aftur Father Tony Byrne, kaþólskur prestur, eins og ég sagði ykkur, sem var stóð fyrir og stjórnaði hjálparfluginu fræga í Biafra 1967-1970 í janúar þegar stríðinu lauk með uppreisna manna, en þá var talið að 1.000.000 manns hefðu fallið, en að Father Tony og hans fólk hefði bjargað 1.000.000 börn. Welcome. Thank you for being on our show.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
I understand that, we'll talk about that a bit later, that Hollywood is making a movie.
Well, we hope so.
You hope so.
Yeah, there's good plans for that.
Yeah. When you look back, I mean, you know, there's 40 years, 45 years almost since the start. 42 years since they surrendered in January 15th in 1970. Million lives lost, million children saved, they say about your operation, which is a movie fodder, to say the least. Look back for us and contemplate a little bit, you know, what's happened.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that we're very grateful to the people of Iceland for the wonderful contribution they made to the airlift. People like Captain Tony Jonsson, a great hero, and Captain Grimor Jonsson. These were great men. They did a wonderful work. They risked their lives to save other people's lives. And the people of Iceland were extremely generous in helping us, especially with stockfish and other things, other supplies. But looking back on it, was it worth it all? I believe so. Because innocent children have a right to life. Yeah. And I believe in, that everything had to be done to save those innocent children from death by starvation, especially from a disease called kwashiorkor. Yeah. Kwashiorkor is a disease that is caused by protein deficiency. They had carbohydrates, but they hadn't got protein, and we had to fly in protein. And this was done under a lot of opposition from the Nigerian government. It was a breakaway state called Biafra, and when we started the airlift, there were 14 million people there in Biafra, and 2,000 children were dying every day, and I believed we had to do something. So the first thing we did was to arrange an escape route to a neighbouring country called Cameroon, and I used smugglers to get in food and medicine with the smugglers. A very, very dangerous journey. So we did that for a long time, but the supplies were definitely insufficient. So we decided to buy some planes. I went on television in Germany, and the German government gave 4 million marks at that time, and 4 million marks to our friends, the Anglican, the Protestant churches. And we bought some planes, Super Constellations and DC-7s, and flew in under gunfire to provide some kind of food and medicine for those poor innocent children. And I have never any regrets, even though we lost 16 men, pilots in the operation. We lost about 140 people on the ground. But those people were willing to give their lives to save other people's lives. And it was a marvelous operation. We, thank God, managed to save 1 million innocent children. And unfortunately, 1 million died because we hadn't got sufficient supplies.
When you look at the Arab Spring, we can call it whatever we want. We have seen the Balkans. We saw the Balkans war. We that I'm just mentioning as the latest one. Besides the active war in Afghanistan, have we learned anything? I mean, are we seeing the same process, the same circle of life and death every time?
Yeah, I think we haven't learned that much about the causes of war. The war in Nigeria, Biafra, was all caused because of oil. Yeah. There was an international scare that the world supply of oil was terminating, and it was oil in Biafra, so there was a huge drive by the international powers to get their hands on this oil. And also, we have to understand that the ammunition factories have to keep moving. A lot of investment is made in machinery that manufactures arms, and that investment has to be repaid through war. So there are people today in the world who are very happy to jump into a situation where there's conflict and supply the arms. So it's about the arms trade, it's about oil, it's about power, of course, misuse of power. And it's unfortunate that innocent people die because of wars. Not the people who organize them, or the people who supply the arms, or the people who want the oil. No, the innocent people are the people who really die because of these wars.
But it's kind of funny when you say oil, because my memory, I was a journalist at that time. My memory wasn't that it was about oil. There was a secession, it was a rebellion. And I cannot remember, this being, because there were, billions of barrels underground there. And I mean, Nigeria is still a very volatile state, even if it's, Jonathan, or Goodluck Jonathan, I think the president is called now, that, oil didn't really come into it. It was bad guys, who were starving the children of Biafra, and the colonel there, I can't remember his name.
Ojukwu?
Yeah. He was the bad guy. That he was doing this all for his own fortune.
Yeah. many people thought it was a Christian-Muslim war,
Yeah.
and many people thought it was a religious war, a tribal war. But underneath the whole thing, the root cause was oil, because people were saying, what are we going to do without oil?
Yeah.
And there's oil there, and very good oil, environmentally friendly oil, and loads of it, plenty of it, copious supplies. So let's go in there and get the oil.
Yeah.
But this was not well known, even today. And then the other, as I mentioned already, the whole question of arms purchasing was a big factor, and it happens in all the wars. I think if you really get down to the root causes, it's either about diamonds or war or oil, and then the sales of arms so important, and people love to generate a war so that these benefits can be achieved.
When you look at financing, you said you were giving 4 million marks by the, and you obviously from a lot of good-hearted people, because you went on television and you showed, the children with their, extended stomachs, and so a lot of, little old ladies and men and organization would come. At the same time, somebody must have been running guns and ammunition and making a lot of money from the rebels.
Oh, sure. There's no doubt about it that some of the aircraft used by Britain and other countries were bringing us supplies of food and medicine, but at the same time they were also going to Lagos with arms, and some of them pilots, good people, would come to me with conscience problems and say, listen, what this is awful, that we're sending in the arms to bomb these innocent people, and we're sending them food to feed them at the same time. So this is an awful dilemma. What are we going to do? How do we reckon with this awful situation? So those poor pilots were victims, really, but the people behind them were the people who were organising it. And sometimes there were certain countries that I don't want to mention were given arms to Biafra and selling them to Nigeria to keep the war going.
To keep the war going.
Yeah, exactly. Very much.
But I know that your book here, which I haven't read through, the breaching of the blockade, which is this a lot of Icelandic pilots like Argrimur and Þorsteinn Jónsson, state pilot, the famous one, who did it. But there is also the story that you made a deal with the devil. I mean, the main gun runner or gun smuggler. I mean, you made a deal with him. Fly 5 flights of arms. Do one for the children.
No, 5 flights of relief supplies and do one for the children. No, there was a guy called Hank Wharton. Hank Wharton was a notorious man, wanted internationally because of his reputation. I had to deal with him because no other person at the early stages would fly to Biafra except a guy like Hank Wharton. And Hank Wharton was a man who had a lot of good in him as well as a lot of bad. And I believe everybody has some good and some bad. And, nobody's totally bad and nobody's totally good. And Hank Wharton, I had to make an agreement with him to fly in supplies, and during the agreement in Hotel Tivoli in Avenida República in Lisbon, I met him there for the first time, and I said, look, we have to save the children. He said, oh yes, I really believe we should save the children. And then I said, okay, let's make a price. So he gave me a very extraordinary price. I said, Hank, I'm a Catholic priest, but I'm a tough businessman, so don't talk this nonsense to me. Give me a price that's reasonable. So we argued, and he gave me a price, $3,800 for each flight. And then during the course of negotiation, he mentioned 4 or 5 times he wants to do this for the children. I said, Hank, I believe you, but I want you to prove it's true. So I want you to give 1 free relief flight for every 5. And he looked at me with a strange look, and he said, I will. And he kept his promise.
He kept his promise.
And then when I was going out the door, I never forget what he said to me. He said, Father Tony, wait. He said, would you not work for me and give up this thing, this stupid thing of priesthood?
Yeah.
And I said, I don't think so, Hank. But, you know, that man never cheated me out of $1. I have to say this, my hands on my heart. He was, okay, you want to say he's a gangster, yeah, many people say an international gangster. But I found it was a little part of his heart. It was a great humanitarian there. And he respected, you know, the fact that children were dying, and he wanted to do something to help, as well as make a lot of money, no?
Where did where did you find the Icelandic daredevils? You know, who flew, I mean, Artgrímur told me, I think he made 146 flights.
That's right.
And he got shot at of like 80 of them.
Yeah. See, Tony Jansson and he...
Thorsteinn Jónsson. Steady pilot, we call it.
They flew in. They took on the obligation of flying first. And that meant very dangerous because, you know, the Yak was very tough. I flew in many times. And, you know, I was very lucky to be alive and to live through it. But Tony Jansson and his friend Addy, as I call him, he flew in on the first flight, and the bomber was up there, and the bomber was ready to blast them out of it. And Tony would say, I've only got baby food on board, I only have medicine. He'd say, you get down there, baby, and I'll blast you out of it. So Tony would pretend to land on this runway. It was a road, actually. We turned into
you turned 3 roads into
runway.
Airport. Runway.
Yeah. So Tony would pretend to land and then take up again. And then he would circle a circle, waiting for him, the bomber, to waste his fuel. Then he'd try again and he'd take up again. And he'd do this several times.
You were the bomber you were talking about belonged to the Nigeria, the federal.
The federal government, the bomber. Egyptian pilots, which I have to say weren't the best, and thank God for us, they weren't very accurate. And so Tony would continue to do this, and eventually when the bomber would have his fuel burned out, he returned and Tony would land. Now, when Tony got, just to tell you how dangerous it was, when Tony needed a rest and we were afraid to overfly him, Tony and his crew, with Addy, we got another pilot. And he tried to imitate Addy, so he would pretend to land and take up again. He did this 4 or 5 times, and he said, hey, this guy has no bombs on board. So then he landed and put the plane in a finger on the runway, and he got a direct hit.
He got a direct hit?
Yeah, so I heard about this when I was in São Tomé. That was the base, the little island off West Africa was the base we were using. It was then owned by the Portuguese. And I heard about this, so I flew in to see what the damage was. And on our flight, we met the bomber coming out, and then I got in. And I thought they were all dead because the smell was awful at the airport, and I thought it was burning human flesh. In fact, it was the smell of dried fish. And then I went to the hospital to meet the pilots, and some of them were badly injured, but not too badly. They survived. So, but that just tells you the danger that these pilots from Iceland went into, and were very heroic people. I mean, Iceland should be very proud of what they did, because they risked their lives to save other people's lives.
I mean, daredevil. They were flying into. They were playing with death.
Yeah, Tony especially had a lot of war experience. And he knew how to duck the flak. He'd make that plane dance in the sky to miss the stuff coming at him.
Well, how come the operation was made out of São Tomé?
Well, I had a local bishop, my own bishop, who was a local Biafran man. And he begged me to do something to save his people, as he said. And so when I started the escape route with the smugglers, and we bought the planes.
You were a practicing priest in Nigeria, in Africa for 35 years.
I'm still a practicing priest. But I became a smuggler. And I had to mix with gangsters of all description. I didn't care once we were saving the children. And so I was asked by my Pope, by my bishop, to go to the Pope in Rome. To ask the Pope to make peace, to try and do something to make peace. So I was instructed to go with a pilot, and the pilot happened to be Hank Wharton, the guy I was talking about.
The smuggler.
The window was blown out of the plane, and I was sitting on that plane without the window missing.
Yeah.
And we landed in San Tome, and that was the first time I even heard the word San Tome.
Yeah.
And I decided to use that as a base. It was a prison island when I got there by the Portuguese. The people who were looking for independence were put there into prison. And eventually, when we went there, they put the prisoners somewhere else, and a big operation happened in San Tome. But it was about an hour and a half's flight to Biafra from San Tome.
Yeah.
And we'd fly at night time only, without any lights and with no radio communication.
Yeah.
We couldn't have radio communication because
So you knew nothing until they came back, really?
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
they left and they came back.
And what we do was we tried to fly over marshy areas where they couldn't put ACAC.
Yeah.
So we made use of this tactic, fly as much as possible over marshy areas because we knew they couldn't place the ACAC guns there. But the stuff would be flying at us, you know. It was very dangerous. But our pilots were pretty good in ducking the ACAC stuff coming across.
I mean, when you say the Pope, you know, asked the Pope to make peace. I mean, because was it in a way, aside from oil, a Christian-Muslim war?
No, it wasn't. But see, the Pope was Pius the 12th.
Yeah.
And he had been in Nigeria as a cardinal.
Yeah.
And he knew the situation. Montini was his name before he became Pope. And he had a great love for the Nigerians, great love for Africans in general. And he was very concerned about the welfare of children. And he said, the law, break it. The law is there for people, not people for the law.
Yeah.
So he told me, go ahead, do it. And because the children have a right to live. And he said, you know, when there's a fire in the house, you can break into the house without the permission of the owner and save the children. It's like that now. So anyway, he then sent 2 delegates, Russian Monsignor, Roscoe, and an Irish Monsignor called Conway. Yeah. He sent them to Nigeria to ask Gowan, who was a Christian, and a good Christian, a Protestant man, a very good guy. Asked him, head of the Nigerian state, and asked him to make peace. And he said yes, but the others won't. So they tried then to come into Biafra, and they couldn't cross the line. So I had to get them in from San Tome to Biafra. And there they negotiated some kind of a peace deal, but never really came off. Yeah. But at least the Pope made the effort to stop the war.
This operation, 2 years operation, cost an enormous amount of money.
Yeah.
Aside from the German government giving you 4 million mark, how did you manage to get all this money? You had to pay for the fuel, you had to pay for the pilot. I mean, they were risking their lives. Yeah. How did you do it?
Well, there was a lot of fundraising going on, including the fundraising in Iceland. The public were asked to help. Some governments gave a little amount, but most of the money came from the ordinary people in the street who wanted to save the kids. And you see, it was the first time in history that a war was on television. Yeah. Television was just in. So this image of the starving child from Kwashiorkor with the swollen body, with the matchstick legs, with the red hair. Normally the hair was black, but the hair would turn red because of the lack of protein. That image was implanted on the minds of the world. And people were so generous. They just gave everything they had. I mean, kids used to send me the toys for the children even. And you know, the small people gave huge amount of money to keep it going. So it was a fantastic international operation run mainly by the churches. And there were 84 church organizations involved. And it was great that we could work, the Catholics and the Protestants, the Lutherans, the Methodists, the Presbyterian, and the Jewish community. I was sent to New York to appeal to the Jewish community, and I remember so well, we had a hall full of rabbis, and I begged them to do something, but I didn't seem to be getting anywhere. And then I showed them an image on a projector of the Biafrans queuing up to be registered, and then struck up the registration. and they spoke to each other, and they sent 2
Auschwitz.
ships. Oh, brother, this really touched our hearts. And they sent 2 shiploads of supplies to Biafra. They were very, very generous. And when I had the launch of that book that I wrote about, I invited the chief rabbi in Ireland to come along, and I thanked him publicly for what his people did. So it was a great thing that the Protestant, the Catholics, the humanists, the Jewish, everybody got in there and did something to save those children. And thank God, as I said, we saved 1 million children, but unfortunately the sad thing is 1 million died.
Have you been back since?
No, I wouldn't go back because during the war I was 4th on the wanted list, and I'm afraid...
Are you still wanted in Nigeria?
Well, I'm not going to
Dead or alive or what?
I used to say to my fellow priests and religious, I am wanted, you are needed. I'm more important than you are. But I would not give them the opportunity of saying, hey, come here, I want to talk to you, and we give you free accommodation.
Anyway, bridging the blockade, I don't know where you can find, probably on probably you can get it on Amazon or whatever. Blockade, bridging the blockade. Þetta reyfari í raun og veru, eins og Biafra flugið var, hjálparstarfið sem að íslensku frumönnirnir voru. We're gonna make a small commercial interruption, and Kathleen Maguire, Sister Kathleen Maguire, is gonna join us, and then we are gonna talk about what you have twice been to Iceland, talk about bullying.
Yes,
and I want to, first question I'm gonna ask you both, how do you react to bullying?
Right.
Farðu ekki langt.
Seljum ódýra tónera og bleikilki í flestar gerðir prentara. Bleikilki.is, Fjarðargötu 11, sími 517 0150. Foskam öryggismyndavélar, fjarstýrðar með snjallsíma, greina hreyfingu og senda boð. Engin áskriftargjöld, eirberg.is. Varahlutur í bíla síðan 1960. Betri kostur í bílavarahlutum í 50 ár. Stilling.
Allianz tryggir þína framtíð.
Sér aftur, förum frá Biafra í einelti. Þau hafa bæði, gestur okkar hérna núna til viðbótar ísk nunna, Kathleen Maguire, Sister Kathleen Maguire. Welcome. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Við ætlum að tala vegna þau hafa verið á Íslandi, voru á Íslandi fyrir 3 árum og fluttu fyrirlestur. Þau hafa starfað með fólki sem með regnboga börnum og hafa í 16 ár unnið að rannsóknum á þessu sviði og gefið bæði skrifað saman bækur þetta erindi og hann. Father, how do people know they are being bullied, aside from kids in school, and how do you react?
Well, I think we have to be very clear on one thing, that bullying is the persistent and repeated acts of aggression, psychological, verbal or otherwise. And the keynote here is persistent. It's not a one-time act. And it's geared to the total breakdown of the person, the victim. And it can be very, very painful. It causes deep psychological pain. Horrific. And I'm a victim of bullying in the workplace, and I know what it's like.
Wait a minute, you work in the church?
I worked in the church. I worked in programs for suicide prevention, and during the course of those program, I should say, there was a certain lady there, and I appointed her as registrar of the program. She's a volunteer, and she started focusing on me and ridiculing me in public and calling me bad names, and even with our colleagues, and it continued and it continued and it continued. And I didn't know what bullying was, really, at that time.
Not to your face, but behind your back?
No,
or
straight
to your face?
Yeah, and I'm sure she did it behind my back, but she certainly did it with her other colleagues, ridiculing me and saying I was kind of a bit stupid and didn't understand, and I shouldn't have been in this job and all the rest. Painful put-downs, constantly nagging, and I couldn't do anything right. And this was having a horrific effect on me. I used to wake up in the middle of the night and see the image of this woman in my mind's eye.
Really?
And I had a pain in the pit of my tummy, and the doctor couldn't explain it. Until such one day, one of our lecturers, who was a clinical psychologist, came in and he said, "Tony, do you know what's happening to you?" I said, "I don't know, but I don't feel good."
Yeah.
He said, "That woman is bullying you."
Yeah.
That was the first time I realised the impact of bullying on the individual, and it was a revelation to me. And actually it was a process of liberation, because now I could explain why I was waking up at night time perspiring with the image of this woman in my mind's eye, and why I had this pain in the pit of my tummy, and why I wasn't feeling good. Everything kind of fell into place, and I realised what it was.
And how could you confront her then, or what?
Yeah, well, what I did was I made a record of all the times she bullied me.
Yeah.
When and where and what she said, her body language and all the rest, and who was witness. And I went to her and I said, "Look, I have a record of all the times you bullied me, and enough is enough. And if you don't stop, I'll take further steps to stop you." Now, you see, you have to understand, bullies are cowards. And when they are confronted in this way, we call it the informal method, they back off. Usually, but not always. But if they don't, then you have to take the formal method, which is through the courts, where you take action, legal action, to stop it. But it has to be confronted, because I used to say, "She's only having a bit of fun. She stop it after a while." She didn't.
Did she stop? Or
She stopped after when I confronted
leave, or
when I confronted her with the diary, the record of bullying events. Of course she backed up, because...
But did she leave? Did you kick her out, or
she said you never work with me again, so I wrote a beautiful letter thanking her for all she did.
Well, it's really not a laughing matter, but you know, it's deadly serious.
Oh,
and Sister Kathleen, sorry. When you're faced with this, when you, especially younger people, I mean, this is very kind of, I would think, a special occasion, you know, when you are grown up and there's a volunteer who goes after you. Maybe she was in love with you. Ever thought about that?
Well,
and she couldn't have you.
If that's the case, it was the one-sided, let me tell you.
now, what about the young people, the kids? I mean, the lectures you gave, and in Iceland now, I state unequivocally that there is the awareness about bullying is tremendous. I mean, I think in schools now, when something comes up, people have the means and people have the determination to do it. But how should children react? How do they, aside from running away and having, you know, the nightly sweats and perspiration and scared?
I don't know. I think that awareness is the thing to dwell on, because after our lectures on bullying, we have often had people coming to us and saying, "I was in a quandary, I didn't know what to do, but now having heard what you had to say, I know what I have to do, I know where to start." And a lot of parents have learned how to deal and how to protect their children and how to encourage them. But one thing that we must try to get over to our children is that if they are being bullied, to watch their body language and not to appear weak or shy or afraid, because the bully is very quick to notice that somebody is afraid. And
that excites the bully if he sees the prey, you know, kind of running away.
A bully thrives on weakness,
on the weakness
and vulnerability. And the more vulnerable a person is, the more the bully will play havoc on them. I had an example of my own grandnephew who was being bullied, and I happened to be driving up the walk where he was walking in from school one evening, and he was a very tall boy, and he was walking with his shoulders all curved like that, and so I went into him and I said, "You know, Niall, you'll have to do something about this. I watched you walking, you know," and when he learned how to walk and show strength instead of fear, he was better able to deal with the bully.
How does the parent, I mean, usually it comes as a thunderbolt, you know, when they realize that their kids are being bullied. But aside from, you know, being like this, walking like they are hanging on a coat hanger, what do the parents see?
Ingrid, parents are devastated.
Yeah.
Because usually the child will come home and the child will be upset.
Yeah.
And the parent doesn't know why the child is upset. And you see, bullies also thrive on silence.
Yeah.
And if the child doesn't say why they're upset
Yeah.
and doesn't talk to the parents about it, the situation gets very serious.
Yeah.
And I had a case recently where the parent was so upset because the child who was being bullied in school was upsetting the house. Because he was releasing his aggression at home in the house. Now, if you have a 13-year-old child and he's 3 or 4 children walking up to him on the corridor in school and saying, "This time tomorrow you'll be dead," I mean, that's very frightening.
Yeah.
And so it's only natural that will be brought home to the home, and that tension in the child.
A man I know, he has a 13-year-old daughter in school. And she, you know, he couldn't figure out, this happened a few months ago. She was down and couldn't figure out what was going on. Finally, he got her out that she was being bullied for a certain reason. And he instantly, he dropped everything. And for like 2 or 3 days, he found out which kids were doing it. He contacted every parent, he contacted the school administration, and basically in a week's time he stopped it. Is this the proper way when a parent, you know, there's nothing more terrible when you realize that your child is being bullied or tortured and you don't know what happened.
See, the biggest mistake would be for that parent to train the child to get physical. Like some parents would say, okay, let's bring the child to boxing or let them do karate, right? But if the child, the victim, strikes, then the evidence is very clear. He gave his bully a black eye, and he's the bad person. So that's the wrong thing to do. The proper thing to do is to contact by phone the teacher of the class. Now, not to go physically to the school, because if the parent goes to the school, that child who's the victim will get worse. He'll get terrible treatment from the others. They'll ridicule him as a squeaker, telltale. You must have an interview with the teacher of the class after school sometime, and you know, say to the teacher, look, I believe that you're a good person, that you want to protect the children. I'm worried about my child, and can you do anything? And then if that teacher does nothing, then they have to apply to the principal, and the principal doesn't. Then there's a school board. And the school board has to do something, and then if the school board does nothing, then they have to go to the Department of Education in the government. So there is a process.
But when do you go to the parent, like he did? He found out the name of the kids who were doing the bullying. He contacted every parent, you know, right away. And I mean, he managed to stop it. Was this really by the book, not the proper way to do it?
He was very lucky, because if I accuse somebody of being bullied and I haven't got evidence, defamation of character, I can end up in court. And no parents want to hear that their child was a bully. So you have to be very, very careful, because it can end up in court action for defamation of character, and a lot of money could be lost. So they must be very, very careful. Would you agree, Kathleen?
Yeah, your friend was very lucky.
But I mean, there is a different law. This is not America or Ireland, or you know, where you can sue for defamation.
Yeah, but I mean, people, if they know there's money there, they can learn very quickly.
But I think one of the most important things to do is, just as Tony kept his diary in his own situation, it is so important for the child to know that the importance of the diary too. But with the help of the parent,
the child who is keeping it a secret, he is not thinking about writing down,
no,
you know,
on
it. So I mean, is this something that you advise in your lecture?
Yeah, well, I know of a case where the parent said to the child who's being bullied, look, you know, Mommy and Daddy are here to listen to your story. When you're ready, tell us what's worrying. There's something now, you know, you're ready, tell us the story. And they can tell the story when they're ready. But, it's so important for the parent to sit down and say, okay, tell us now what was said and who said it and how and where was it done. And for the parent to help the child to record, and above all, a very important thing for parents, to get across it's not your fault. It's the fault of the bully. They're jealous of you because you're good looking, because you're good at studies, because you're tall, you're not short. And keep telling them it's not your fault, because eventually, if this goes on, the child believes it's their fault. They're doing something wrong. They're not doing something wrong. And to tell them, look, you don't worry because you're such a good child. We're so proud of you. And that's why they're jealous of you.
One very special story that I know of, because there was a lady who came on my show years ago. She was a teacher at the school, and her son was after school, 10 or 12 years old, and he was being bullied right in front of his mother. She didn't know, and he wasn't, he wasn't telling her. And then when she found out, they took him out of that school and moved him to another school, 10 miles away. Well, the drums of the jungle. There was a message from this school to the new school. This person, this guy, is to be bullied. So the bullying started right off at the, because there was some, I don't know, I mean, somebody knew somebody say, hey, this guy was, he escaped, get it.
Yeah, but this goes back to Kathleen's point, the body language.
Yeah.
That child has to be trained. John Wayne, I used to say to the parents, get them to walk slowly, keep up their shoulders, and be determined. Look at the bully here, not just right here, and turn around the head and look again, and just show that you're going to hold on to your dignity, and you're not going to get away with it.
I don't know any situation, and I know many of them, where a child was transferred from one school to another, where they were not bullied in the one school they went to. Invariably they're bullied again if they don't learn how to deal with it.
And a very interesting question is, children are not born bullies. How do they become bullies? Very often they see parents or partners bullying each other. Or maybe, Kathleen, you have some theories there about if they're given
if they see,
everything
as
they
Tony said, if they see an adult bullying each other, then they'll come to believe that that's what I do when I grow big.
A role model thing.
And there's another theory where if a child is corrected and not given reasons as to why they can or cannot do something, they won't understand. And so they'll grow a battle in the little mind and the heart of the child, and the child will see them not being allowed to do something or having to do something because of parent power. So when they're alone and there's no parent power to keep them in subjection, then they will do whatever they can, foul or fair means, to get what they want, and they'll bully. And another very interesting one is if a child is spoiled, given everything that he or she wants, always pampered, and never refused anything, the child will come to believe that he or she is the centre of the world, and they'll grow up believing that that's what they should be and that's how they should be treated. And when they get bigger, especially if they become adult, and they still have that mentality, they'll soon learn that they're not the centre of the world, but they'll bully in order to get what they want.
They will bully.
And see, the difficulty is when the child leaves the school and they go into the workplace, they bully there.
They bully as well.
We believe that internationally, according to international research and local research, 1 in 4 workers is bullied. 1 in 4. And because of the lack of job opportunities, bosses are beginning to take advantage of this, and so they bully the people, and they think, bullying is the way to get a job. It's not. Bullying in the workplace causes a high rate of absenteeism, low productivity. It causes dysfunctional workplace. It just doesn't work. Bullying in the workplace, it just is not good for the business. So, I mean, it's amazing the projection. The child watching partners or siblings bullying each other. They repeat that then later on in the school. Then later on, they leave the school and they go into the workplace, and there the bullying starts again.
I hate to change the subject because time flies, and I know the other field of your specialty, studying, and giving lectures about suicide. And suicide, in many cases, is the final solution or the only escape route for someone who has been incessantly bullied, through years and years and years.
Yeah, it's very.
And just recently, in a little village in Iceland, I think a 16-year-old boy killed himself, and people in the village suddenly woke up to the fact then that everybody knew, just like in a little Irish village or an English, whatever, or an American, and everybody is shocked, but then they realized that this was happening. I know that it's difficult to see signs. Well, the imminent, you can see if somebody's down in the dump, but we all are that now and then, and then we come up. And Kathleen, I know you have a family story that recently happened and where there is no explanation.
Well, yes, I find it hard even to think about it, or to, as they say, get my head around it. One of my nieces is married to a man both of them are teachers. My niece and the husband were teachers. He's 44 years of age, doing well, bright career, wonderful career, everything going absolutely well for him in his subjects. He had no mortgage. There was no sign of any depression. Wonderful wife, 4 marvellous little girls, 19 in her second year of teacher's training, 19, 15, 12 and 9. And everything was normal in that family, everything. And my niece herself said that they did that morning what they did for all 21 years of marriage. The alarm went off at the same time, 10 to 7. He got up and went downstairs because he had to travel about 15, 20 miles to his college where he was teaching. My niece was only teaching over the road from home. He did exactly that. He got up, he went down, he would come back up and say goodbye to them and make sure they were up, because they had half an hour more in bed every morning than he. So he didn't come back, and she woke up and she went downstairs and he wasn't there. So it was strange for her that the car was there. Anyhow, to cut a long story short, in looking for him, she went out to a storeroom they had out at the back where they kept the children's bicycles and things like that, and he was hanging dead. No warning whatever, no sign of depression, no financial problems, no difficult children, all the things that we would look out for in suicide. There was no sign, none, and we're just baffled.
Is this... very often when you read the obituaries, there's a very special tradition in Iceland. You write obituaries, in friends and relatives in the paper. And when you read about suicide, and they say, "Oh, hopefully you are in a better place now, where you feel better." Out of the blue, thunderbolt, people are shocked, and no way that he could have done it. Where is the sign?
Well, I think people have to be aware that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. That problem might be economics, it might be a bad relationship, but they have to know that it's not the appropriate response to stress or strain. If they're suffering from depression, and men are very poor at this, men let it fester within them and they don't want to upset. We don't know about Kathleen's relative, but very often they want to tell their partner or wife or husband about how they're feeling inside. Now, if you go to a bar tonight and men are drinking, somebody will say, "How are you feeling?" "I feel bad, I feel lousy." No, excuse me, if you go into a group of women and they're having a little cup of coffee or a drink, somebody says, "How are you?" They will say, I feel bad, or I feel down. If you go to a group of men, they say, "Oh yeah, what about the cup matches last night? What do you think of that football match?" They'll be off talking. They won't talk about themselves. They let it fester. And so it is that for every one woman that dies by suicide, 4 women die. Oh, sorry, I'm mixing up. For every one woman that dies by suicide, 4 men.
Yeah.
But also on the reversal side, for every one woman who, every one man who attempts suicide, 4 women attempt. Because very often they don't use lethal weapons and they use water in a river or they use medicine, they can be saved. Men tend to use shotguns or revolvers or ropes to kill themselves. So, you know, it's so important for us for the public to know the early warning signals.
Where is the early warning? Where, I mean, aside from, I mean, if somebody's down in the dump for a month, I mean, you know something is wrong.
Yeah, especially when they're just looking at gawking, I call it, at television, not really taking anything and just looking. If their performance at work or at school is dropped an awful lot. If they're giving away personal possessions like CDs, very things they love, or if and hand them around to their friends, or if they're talking constantly about dying and being reunited with their relatives. If they're talking about suicide, and if they say life is not worth living, that has to be taken seriously. If, for example, they are, you know, becoming very tearful and down in the dumps, if they're not associating with their friends, if they don't go for a drink, if they don't go to a football match, they don't go for football practice, and they're not answering the phone. These are early warning signals. Now, a multiplicity of these could be very serious. 1 or 2 of them may not be very serious, but if you have a collection of them there impinging on the individual, then they need some help.
Can the layman do it? What can the layman do? I mean, you would say you worry about it, and you say, why don't you see you know, you want to see somebody, you don't want to say psychiatrist or psychologist. Well, I mean, so the wife who sees a husband or a husband who sees a wife, you know, why don't you go and see them? How do you do it?
That's a very difficult thing to do, but what we try to tell people is to advise them to go to their GP, their doctor, and then the doctor will know, you know, and if sometimes if you have a good relationship with your GP, the family GP, you should be able maybe to forewarn the doctor.
Yeah.
But my plea, in the light of my experience, my plea would be to anyone out there who is in any way thinking of suicide. They would try so very hard to think of what they're leaving behind, because it is devastating.
You said you were at a funeral for somebody, a suicide victim, and you said in your speech something. What did you say?
See, we have to show compassion to people who die, and also compassion for those left behind. But I remember doing a service for a young man who died by suicide, and there were plenty of people, young people in the church, and they were looking there. And I said to them, look, here's a rose. Beautiful, it's beautiful, it smells lovely, but there are certain thorns there in that rose. That represents this man's negative emotions, his depression. But I said, if this man were to talk to you, he would say to you, look, my friends, don't do what I did. There are other ways of solving the problem.
Father Tony, Sister Kathleen, our time is done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very, very, very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us here.
Good luck in all your good work and a safe journey back home to Ireland.
May I just say, God bless Iceland. It's a great country.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Látum þetta duga núna. Kæra þakkir fyrir að fylgjast með þessum írsku gestum okkar. Sjáumst á fimmtudaginn. Takk fyrir.